All right, board gaming enthusiasts, what are your thoughts on consumable board games? Now, a little while ago, a couple of years ago, this idea of legacy board games were unfolding. And a great legacy example, I put it out there with no spoilers, never any spoilers on my channel. Well, I do my best because I want you to discover the game yourself. Gloomhaven. I love Gloomy. I'm not giving away any hidden knowledge, but in Gloomhaven, you have a blank map, and as you explore the various quests and unlock them, depending on decisions and what becomes available, you put down stickers on the board, and it literally evolves. Likewise, the characters, as you unlock them, you get to upgrade certain cards. You get to physically change the game as you go. And certainly at any point, even when you complete the game, you can go back through and hit up the quests that you missed. And the game has a very much living feel because nothing is stopping you from taking other adventurers or other characters through the game or just playing random scenarios and revisiting the places that you've explored. But fundamentally, and Gloomhaven is a great example, you alter the game, you can't reset it back to its original state. On a side note, there are some kits that allow you to do that allow you to reset the game. Some people tear up the cards, some people don't tear up the cards, some people make a marker. I mean, there are things you can do to keep it for a reset, but the fundamental mechanics of the game go in and say, changing the game. And I remember when legacy games, leading into consumables, when legacy games first came out, it was very groundbreaking. You know, the idea was you have a board game and the state might change as you go through a campaign, but not permanent. And any part I could reset it or I could reboot it or just randomly play it and restore it back. And originally, I have to say, I have a couple of legacy games in my collection. Originally, I was very skeptical also because I buy a title with the intention of, I'm going to play this title in my collection like crazy. We're going to play it nonstop. So I want to get the most value out of it. If I legacy it, how does that work? How do I get that back? And Gloomhaven certainly did it right. So I say that as a foundation to say, hey, this was a great board gaming experience. It doesn't work necessarily with every type of legacy game out there, but when done right, it's done right. So now we're starting to see more and more consumable games. And we're in the second edition right now, the second reboot, Time Stories. When I originally bought into Time Stories, the first edition, the first pass through it, I had no intention of even buying into it. I really wasn't even aware that it was a consumable game. A copy was at the local gaming store where we have X-Wing miniature tournaments. I won a ton of prizes, some store credit. I really didn't need more X-Wing miniature stuff at the time. I was caught up. I don't really need more 40K stuff at the time. So wanting to give that store credit back to the store, I'm like, all right, I'll buy a game. I'll support that. Picked up Time Stories, knowing nothing about it other than it's like a experience type game. Going through the first quest, and no spoilers, especially with Time Stories, about halfway through I realized this is a one and done scenario in the core box, and future scenarios are one and done. So the idea, and again, I'm not giving anything away, the idea is you're a time agent and you go through and you have to complete the quest. If you fail, you run out of time, you die, dead end, something happens, you just return back to the Time Stories HQ and then restart the quest again. And it's a very, very interesting mechanic with how it handles death or loss. The idea is you're probably going to run through a quest 2 or 3 times before you solve it. And even when you solve it, you'll know 90% of it. You can then run through it to see like, okay, I know this is the adventure path to win. At this point, here's a place that you go. Maybe it leads to a win. It probably doesn't. Let me explore it anyway. But the idea is you consume it, you play it, you're done. Now, the Time Stories, it was like modules. So you plug in these other modules and you play them. And my thought at the time there was, is this value for gaming dollars? Because I was still coming from the mindset of, I buy something like Runebound, one of my favorite games. I invest in the expansions. I'm playing that a couple of times a month. I've got Runebound set up right now. I'm running through solo. And even though I know the scenarios and I know the different combinations, I'm along for the ride and I'm having a lot of fun. It is not a one and done type scenario. So exploring something like Time Stories, I thought to myself, well, if I have 3 or 4 of the modules, that replay, how many games do we buy? I'm not talking about the games you become obsessed with, maybe like I'm obsessed with Runebound, but games that you buy where it's good enough to play through a couple of times. I mean, are you really, honestly, the titles in your collection? Absolutely, Fritz. I'm going to answer absolutely, right? The titles in your collection, are you really getting like 50, 60 plays out of a title? Or are you getting 10 or 15 before you move on to something else? Or are those 10 or 15 plays spread out with a group? Not to mention there's so many things crammed in my head. Wargaming miniatures, Dungeons & Dragons miniatures, role-playing games, board games. Like a lot of the games that I have that I explore, I don't even remember half the stories in them. There's a lot of stuff in there. So my thought was they're consumable, but when it's done right, if it offers me a premium experience, which every Time Stories module has, if it offers me a premium experience, maybe the fact that it's a one and done or 2 and 3 times done, maybe that's not so bad. And that, of course, is before we even plug in the fact that the Time Stories community, we've seen this with fan content, custom content. Back in the day, it was people were making amazing fan content, but the best you could do was like print it out on black and white printer or color printer, cut it out and serviceably use it. You know, a lot of my Runebound second edition content was like that. Well, now with print on demand and other services, people have printed up custom Time Story stories, and it looks fantastic. It integrates with the game. You wouldn't even know. So really, when there's 20 or 30 more additional stories out there, plus the content, the fact that they're consumable, am I ever going to even consume them all? And I have some of the better rated stories printed that I've played, that I have set aside to play. So initially looking at that, what is your thoughts on consumable single play board games, equating that to an experience based on the price, based on the play, based on what you get out of it? Is it really any different than most normal titles in your collection, and not the ones that you're obsessed with in your collection?